Hello, Glenn.
Hello, Ruth.
Thank you very much for having this conversation. And I would like to ask you how you got into the Alexander technique. What were the circumstances? What were you doing at the time? Your background, maybe a little bit.
Right. Well, before I trained as an Alexander teacher, I worked in the theatre for 10 years. Mm. And I worked for 8 years in a fringe theatre group that specialised in getting plays to non-theatre going audiences. Mm. And I was involved in acting and writing and occasionally directing and always stage managing, moving stuff around, because we were travelling in a big van. So at some point in those 10 years, I went to yoga classes and I pulled my pelvis out. Mm. So I was slightly hypermobile in the pelvic area and started to suffer from sacroiliac pain from overstretching in the yoga exercises. So it just so happened, this is a real just so happened, that my sister lived underneath an Alexander teacher in her flat in Highgate in London. Mm. And she said, perhaps you ought to try having some Alexander lessons. I've got this neighbour and she's given me the odd experimental, try out, and it seems interesting. Maybe she can help you. And that neighbour was Betty Rayner, who you may have heard of. She also has written a book and she's changed her name. So in the book, it's Elizabeth Langford, if that rings a bell.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Yeah. Mind and Muscle, I think her book was. And she hadn't written the book then. So off I went for Alexander lessons with Betty, and it was wonderful. I mean, she did wonders. And so for about 6 years, in between work assignments, I would go and have Alexander lessons and keep myself going. And then 8 years in a fringe theatre company is demanding.
Oh, I can imagine.
And I burnt out really, and I just knew I couldn't go on. Mm. By that time, we were a well-recognised Arts Council supported group, and I was invited to apply for a grant, and I got 2 grants actually that enabled me to go to America and look at fringe theatre in America. But before I did that, I mean, I wasn't planning to do that actually, but I wanted to organise training. I knew that once I gave up work in the theatre, the next thing for me would be to train as an Alexander teacher. It was clear.
How did that come about? How did that decision grow?
Well, the lessons had a powerful effect. The whole walking in a different way was wonderful. I remember, because I was, I'd had very poor posture really as a young woman. I had wings shoulders, if you know what I mean, and I did something funny with my head and neck, and just learning to walk with a reasonably free neck and take in my surroundings. It's still one of my pleasures that walking, you can really use the principles and have a lovely experience of walking. So knowing that I just didn't have the energy to carry on working in the theatre, and I needed something that would serve me, and the Alexander teaching was really about living life in a very different way, and I recognised that from Betty's teaching, and I thought that this is going to be of help to me, and then I have something that I can work with. So that was the decision, and I came down to London. The company was based up in Leeds by then, and I came down to London and went to Walter Carrington's training course and was told it was a 2-year waiting list. So this is 1979.
Okay.
And that they told me at Walters that, but you ought to talk to Don Burton because he's planning to start a new training course. And I talked to Don Burton, and he welcomed me to come and train with him in January 1980. So I had 6 months, and that's how I got the Arts Council grant and went over to America. And I'll mention something about that later. I won't now because it won't make sense. So I started training in January 1980 with Don. And in the first year of training, in the first term of training, I started to see auras. I started to have rather extraordinary psychic experiences. As I was being undone from the work, my whole psychology was changing. I was getting some good psychic experiences, but some that were quite difficult.
Okay. And you hadn't had that before?
Never had that before. And I now go back to my trip to America, because I spent America going around all these fringe theatres, which was great. Ended up in San Francisco, and the friend of a friend that I was staying with there said, you must try having a psychic reading. We're talking about the new age burgeoning in America. And so I, very skeptical, I said, really? But I said, okay. And off I went to have a psychic reading. And when I introduced myself to the psychic reader, I was clearly skeptical. I was saying, well, I was just advised I should try this out, So we had this reading, and she said, I'll just sit and look at your chakras and aura and see what's happening. So she was silent for a minute or two, and then she said, well, I'm rather surprised because you're actually very, very psychic, and you're picking up a lot of negative energy because you don't know how to look after your psychic mechanism. Well, I took all that with a big spoonful of salt and carried on with my life as I planned it to be. But then when this started happening, as soon as I began training, I thought, goodness, that psychic person was correct. And so that's how I came to be involved with the chakras, which I don't know if you know that. I've written about the chakras.
Yes.
But what happened was this psychic reader said, the trouble is you're going back to England, and the only place you can train to look after yourself is with the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, which is a very religious organisation, whereas it's very different what was happening in the New Age in California.
Okay.
So I thought, right, well, I've got to find the Spiritualist Association and see if they'll let me train. Although I had no desire to be a spiritualist reader and stand on platforms and talk. But anyway, I went, and the teacher took a look at me and said, yes. And so, as well as doing my training in the mornings in the Alexander technique, one afternoon a week, I went to this psychic development group, and I learnt about the chakras, and I learnt how to open and close the chakras at a psychic level, and it actually helped me a lot. And it made sense of how I got burnt out from the theatre days, which are very emotionally intense.
Yeah.
So that's how the chakras came into my life at the same time as the Alexander technique.
So 2 trainings parallel.
Yes.
It sounds like quite a lot.
Well, it was only one afternoon a week, and you didn't have to do very much. Don Burton, my head of training, came one afternoon to see what it was like at this psychic training. And one of the things you have to do is you'll be saying, look, Glen, can you just look at the aura of that person over there and tell me what you're picking up about? And Don was asked to look at the aura of somebody in this session he joined in with. And he said, yes, you've got a very good back. All his information was about the muscular skeletal system of this person he looked at. It was great. So, so that was the thing that was happening alongside, which is why when I wrote my first book, the second half, I do start talking about the chakras.
So you naturally had the ability to see the aura, so you didn't have to actually learn it.
No,
it was just there.
Well, and I it's not something I do on a regular basis. I'm not looking at yours now. But in my workshops with Alexander teachers, of which I've run many to do with working with the chakras, I've often said, well, let's see who can see auras. And 90% of people can see auras if they know how to do it.
Wow.
It's very easy.
Okay.
Especially if you've got that expanded thing that Alexander teachers have. Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about your training, about the experiences you had, the development, apart from the psychic part?
Well, it was a lovely training course. Don was a qualified physiotherapist. He was a brilliant teacher of anatomy and embryology, as well as being a wonderful hands-on teacher. So, and he had a very large training course. I mean, when we start, well, there were only 7 of us to start. We were the first group, but it went up to 20, I think. And he had lots of teachers coming in, so you got a lot of different experiences, and he encouraged bringing in people from other courses. So I think Misha Magda came, or else somebody from his training, teachers on his training course came. People came from McDonald's, so he encouraged a wider understanding of the Alexander technique. And one of the things that Alexander said was, you know, when you're qualified, go away and don't do anything that you've seen me do. It was like, find your own Alexander technique. So that was a lovely thing about the training. And also, you were encouraged by Don, if you wanted to go and have lessons with other teachers, and it would be counted as part of your training. And I had a lot of lessons with Peggy Williams, and that led to me writing my pamphlet. Do you know about I've written a pamphlet about an interview with Peggy Williams.
No, I only saw on your website your 2 books.
Yeah. Oh, no, I've also written, it's there, that's the bit on the table. Have a look afterwards.
Yeah.
So I wrote about what she talked about was her experience of training with Alexander. So it's a lovely booklet for anybody who's training to see how a top teacher like Peggy Williams experienced feeling very insecure and then becoming very good. I had lessons with Walter Carrington and Kriakas, if that makes it, who trained with Walter Carrington, and the other teacher was Margaret Edis. I had about 4 really great teachers that gave me an awful lot. And from Peggy, I really learned the importance of table work. She was very powerful when she worked on the table, which is something that I feel is very important. So that's about what I can say about my training.
And after the training, did you immediately start teaching and building up a practice?
Well, I was very fortunate because I was invited to go and assist on Don's training course in Australia. They opened a new training course in Australia. This was the first training course. And Don was organising it to have different senior teachers every term. And so I went along as one of the assistant teachers for that, and I visited Australia 2 or 3 times to take part in that training course. So that was the first term of my teaching, and then I also worked on the Kendal training course because Don moved from London up to Kendal and opened Lake District, it wasn't always Kendal, opened a training course there, and I worked on that for a while. Working as trainees was the beginning of my teaching. But then I moved to Cheltenham and started my own private teaching practice, and that's what I've mainly done in my teaching career.
I think in that time also when you trained, it was very different from how it is now, wasn't it? That all the training courses had long waiting lists.
Yes.
And that's what I hear from everybody.
We're very big, yeah. Yes.
Of course, these days it's a bit different.
Yes. It's a worry with our local training course because they've qualified teachers and there aren't enough new students coming in. So I was working 1 to 2 afternoons a week on the training course. But in the last 2 or 3 months, I've hardly done anything because of this reduction of they've not needed that extra teacher.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why when you said about, I've got a few private students, but I'm kind of weighing up what the next stage is in my life.
Yeah, but you had phases with lots of
Yeah, oh yes.
clients
When I was in Cheltenham, I built a big practice, and then I had twins, and because one of them was suffering from deafness, I moved to Totnes because there was a small school there with small classes, and that enabled him to hear what was going on and the teacher to be sure he'd heard. So that's how I ended up spending most of that, starting a new practice in Totnes and working here. But I also ran workshops. I visited a lot of training courses.
Yeah.
Usually running workshops on the chakras, but sometimes just offering to be a teacher. And then offering weekend workshops, introductions to the chakras, that then were followed up by an 8-month course, 1 weekend a month, working with the chakras. So there are quite a few teachers who've trained. The wonderful thing about working with the chakras is you're working with the spine. Forget all the emotional, physical, psychological stuff about the chakras. You're working at the central integrating part of the body, and it has a wonderful effect on students. There's a kind of calmness, there's a sense of integration that comes from it.
Okay, and you combine Alexander technique with the chakra work, or do you do it separately?
Well, how it began is that I was working purely as an Alexander teacher, and then every so often a student would burst into tears, or what was extraordinary was sometimes they'd have an amazing emotional memory. I was working on somebody's legs and I could tell that something really powerful was going on, and when it calmed down, she said, "What did you do?" And she was reminded of falling out of her cot and other ways in which she'd hurt that leg throughout her life. She had past life, life memories coming through about the leg. So I thought that I needed to work at a psychological. When that happened, I would say, perhaps I should work with the chakras. Perhaps that might help this, and it did. It was very helpful. So that's what I did for many years. And then at some point, I used to say to people when they arrived, I do also work with the chakras, is that okay? And mostly people said yes. If they said no, I didn't. Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit how you do that?
Well, I start with sitting, standing just a little bit. I find that early part of working with standing and sitting and possibly walking is more for me to have a sense of I'm not considering teaching at that point, but working out what's happening in this person's body. And then we do a lot of table work, and I will we used to call it in my training course the 5 corners, which was head, arms and legs. And so I would do the 5 corners on the table, and then unless something cropped up, and then I would switch to chakra work, and then I would work with the spine, starting at the lower end, hand here, hand on under the sacrum, and work up to the top of the head. I didn't work on the touching. I always felt it needed to be in the aura with the top of the head, and then finishing with a little bit of auric work. So that's how I would include the chakras in my work. It reminds me, I want to tell you this, I went to a stat conference in which, in those days, they were more than one day, and there were a lot of workshops happened. And I was running a workshop for teachers. And I wasn't saying it was going to be about the chakras. And this was a stat conference with the keynote speaker was George Trevelyan, who by this time I'd written my book, and he'd given me a lovely review of the book. And when he heard I was running a workshop, he said, "I'll come to your workshop." And he sat and watched. He didn't do anything. But I got these teachers in pairs, and I said, "Right, now I want you to work on each other, but you're not allowed to touch each other." So one person's sitting and the other person's working in the aura is what I was exploring with them. And to my astonishment, these teachers all started taking each other in and out of chairs without touching. And it was just happening. It was beautiful. Yeah. And George Trevelyan got really excited about it and said, this is the beginning of the new age for the Alexander technique. So that's some of the things that have happened with that work.
It's really interesting because there are, of course, different models to explain the psychophysical unity,
yes.
and you can see it on a psychological trauma-informed way. That's how I was trained at Anthony Kingsley.
Yes, yes.
You see it on the chakra level. You can see it on other energetic levels. Is that basically all the same, or is it for you, or is it different systems? I don't quite know how to put the question.
Well, I don't know enough about other systems. This is the one I learned and was able to use successfully, I believe. But I'm very glad. I mean, I was delighted to make contact with Anthony Kingsley and see how he was approaching it.
Well, it would be the nervous system, and the nervous system stores all the trauma and all the experiences we had.
Exactly, yes. Yes, but just honouring that mind-body unity that Alexander was teaching, and honouring it more than Alexander was allowed to. Yeah. Because this was Victorian days, and people suppressed their emotions, so he couldn't explore that. But I feel it's somewhere where the Alexander technique needs to expand, needs to do more of that kind of work. However, I mean, I don't think what I do is necessarily the right way forward for the Alexander world, because just as when Alexander was trying to impress the medical association, so we have to, and chakras don't fit into that. So Anthony's work's probably more successful in that sense.
But of course, some people fight that as well. But but that's.
But as I say, Alexander said, "Go away and don't do anything you've seen me do." So we're meant to develop. We're meant to embrace more than through what we're learning. Yeah.
And you said you had lessons with MacDonald as well?
No, I haven't had lessons with MacDonald.
Because in Ted McNamara's interview, he's talking about how MacDonald was talking about the energy running up the spine, and that MacDonald had the experience of actually fire going up the spine.
Which in the chakra might have been called Kundalini, rising. Yes, interesting.
And there's the parallel to craniosacral work, which is also working with whatever it is going up and down the spine.
Yes, the craniosacral fluid. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that reminds me of something that Don told his training course, and this was a story that Walter Carrington had shared with the training course, which was that Walter Carrington was FM's assistant. Yeah. And FM, he was in the room sorting out bits and pieces for FM. And FM, the other person in the room was, I believe he was called Peter MacDonald, but he was the head of the British Medical Association, who Alexander had made contact with. And he was trying to get the Alexander technique recognised in the medical world. And Alexander was in the middle of writing Use of the Self, I believe. And Walter heard the BMA leader say to Alexander, and don't put any of that spiritual stuff in this book. So if you read Man's Supreme Inheritance, you see that Alexander is touching on very deep spiritual questions, but it stops. He becomes very matter of fact, fitting in with the requirements of a health service. Yeah. So I think we need to keep expanding.
Yeah. I don't know if it comes from the fact that Alexander was trying hard to get a recognition by the medical profession, that it's not really allowed to talk about the energetic side of things.
And yet there is a quote of Alexander's where he describes direction as moving energy from one through the body to create the effect that you want to create.
Yeah.
So he does use the word energy at one point. Can't remember where the quote is.
Yeah, it's just very interesting. And if you see at a conference or wherever the highly skilled teachers, even if they don't talk about it, you see they are kind of working with energies. Or that's at least my impression very often.
Yeah, I was with the teachers at Kendal and the trainees, and we were discussing, they all said that the question was, what has training in the Alexander technique done for you? And they all were saying how it had opened them up spiritually, that they had a more spiritual perspective on life. It's really interesting.
It really is, yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your 2 books.
Oh, right. Okay. So my first book, I was in my training even thinking we need a book, because the Barlow book was the best book around for explaining it in a very reasonably simple way, rather than the complex writing of Alexander.
Yeah.
When I moved to Cheltenham and was a private teacher, I thought, we really need a book that we can give to a pupil to say, look, this explains the Alexander technique. So that's what I wrote. I wrote a book that was for readers who were taking lessons in the Alexander technique. But because my work had started to include the chakras, I split the book into 2 halves, fundamentals and developments, and the second half was about energy, and then it was about the chakras and so on.
Oh.
And the emotion, yes, there was a chapter called the emotional body and the thinking body. So some teachers were a bit fed up with me they liked the first half. I heard one person tore the book in half because they didn't like the second half, but they wanted to stick with the first half. So there's always been people who've been really on my side. Oh, at last somebody's talking about energy, and people who have really, this is not the Alexander technique. So that's been my experience throughout my teaching. It was a very successful book. I published it in '89, the first year. And yes, then
is it still available?
Yes, absolutely. So
great.
It's on my website.
Oh, good.
Yes, and it sold a lot, so that was good. The other thing that happened was that having been working in Totnes for many years, about 12 or 13 years ago, I moved to Sussex in order to work on a new training course, which was an ATI training course, not a STAT one, with a colleague of mine who had trained with Don, but she'd joined ATI. And I did the first term as her teaching assistant. She was a brilliant anatomist and embryologist. She gave lovely lectures as well.
Who was that?
Delia Rosenboom. Yes, and she ran this course for 3 years, and then they all qualified as ATI teachers. So she only took one group. She didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that was the autumn term. I worked on the training course. Everything's fine. Christmas comes. My sons come for Christmas, persuade me to go ice skating with them on Boxing Day, and I break my wrist. So I can't teach with this broken wrist. But as I'm sitting there thinking, now what? I think I can get this book written on the chakras, because the other thing that happened is giving all these workshops to teachers who were now also working with the chakras. I wanted a book to explain that. It's similar to the Alexander technique. I want to explain how you can work with the chakras. So that took about 6 years. I just spent most of my time in Sussex getting that book written and published. And that came out not so long ago, 2020, something like that.
Okay.
That's quite recent. And then I came back to Totnes, and so I'm in that place of now what do I do next? I think I want to run the chakra workshops again for Alexander teachers. That's what I feel called to do next.
Let's maybe come a little bit to your understanding of the Alexander technique. What's the most important aspect of the technique for you currently?
Right. So I would say the thing that's extraordinary about the Alexander technique is our understanding of mind-body unity.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it extraordinary still that I have somebody in front of me, I put my hands on them, and somehow we stop being two separate people. I can feel what's happening in this person, and with my thoughts I can make changes in her body. You know, tell that to the average person. It's extraordinary what we're doing. The power of thinking, and I think that's the energy. The energy of direction is the energy of thought, and I think it goes way. You know, the potential of understanding how powerful our thoughts are goes way beyond the Alexander technique. Oh, I've not mentioned I got a degree in philosophy, and I've been interested in the question of consciousness all my life. So the Alexander technique shows this extraordinary ability to expand our understanding of consciousness practically, never mind philosophical lectures, you know. So yes, so that the possibility, the connection that you can feel with another person, and the changes you can make through your thoughts and through your presence, through what's happening in your body, is astonishing. I don't think we give ourselves enough credit. So that's one of the most important aspects of the Alexander technique for me. And it's the nice thing about the Alexander, it's got this very practical side. You know, somebody comes who's not had lessons before, and you can talk about good, you know, how to think when you're standing, how to think when you're walking, bending, simple practical ways that you can make these things work better for you, and not suffer so much backache and neckache, etc. But it's also got this deep, profound thing that's happening at another level. So it's an extraordinary thing.
That over time it becomes deeper and deeper, or more refined.
Yes, yes.
May I ask, what's your current definition of the Alexander technique?
Oh, goodness.
In a nutshell.
Depends who I'm talking to.
Yeah.
But I would say to somebody who knows nothing about it that it is a way of learning to move that enables maximum efficiency of the body. And a way of learning to be, actually, not just move, but a way of learning to be in a way that is of value to us rather than is causing us difficulties.
And if someone comes for chakra work to you, would you define it in a different way?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say I do Alexander work as well. Is that the answer? I mean, then
they would ask, what is the Alexander technique?
So then I would say the same.
The same,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And then I would explain that I work with the chakras as an addition because it can engage the psychology more than just working with the Alexander technique. But it does have quite a powerful effect on the spine. So it has an effect on the Alexander work I'm doing as well.
How would you define the Alexander principles, maybe in relation to your more energetic work?
Well, the direction, I would say, is the energy of our consciousness being transmitted. This is if I'm teaching, but for me, working on myself, direction is my consciousness working on me. That would be the direction. Inhibition is terribly important. I mean, direction has to happen within inhibition. And actually, I'm going to try and quote a poem, 2 lines. what if this life is so full of care, there is no time to stand and stare? Have you heard that? So I think that what is this life so full of care? If we're so busy that we can't pause, we can't stop. So that's a kind of big definition of inhibition. There's a pausing is really important, but I think I'm very interested in Ian McGilchrist's work. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a neuroscientist and a psychotherapist, not a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist. And he's done lots of research into the left and right brains. And I think the left brain is where we get into our misuse, being too focused on detail. That the right brain is our global awareness. So I think inhibition is that invitation to stand and stare, that invitation to enter that global awareness, which is so important in life that we learn to do that. Ian McGilchrist argues that our culture is going downwards because of the overemphasis on the left brain.
Yes,
yeah,
I heard that.
Yeah. So I think the Alexander technique can really help with that problem by the importance of total awareness, as well as I'm actually going to walk now. Yeah. So that's how inhibition needs to enfold direction.
Yeah.
What else is there?
Primary control.
Well, that's just knowing that if you free your neck, if you, as well as you can, if you just think freedom and softness, so you're not turning it into a doing, it will affect everything in your body. Yes, it will. So think of it as freeing the neck and allowing everything to free with it, and you feel that happening once you train, don't you? It's wonderful freeing the neck. So yes, it's a lovely message. I mean, I do also honour the importance of grounding, which needs to balance that focus. But weight going down through the heels, please. Stay grounded. Yes.
Yeah. The force of habit.
I think I sort of think that makes sense on its own, doesn't it? We all develop good habits and bad habits, and the Alexander technique can invite you to develop some good habits. I don't believe, and I think this might be contrary to Alexander, that to be a perfect Alexander person, you don't have any habits at all, because I think we need them. But we need to develop good habits rather than bad habits. And we can't be totally aware. I can't drive a car as though I've not driven a car ever before. I need some habits around driving a car, etc.
And speaking and walking.
And exactly, yes, exactly.
All the rest of it,
So, yes, replacing our bad habits with good habits. And learning what our bad habits are, because we probably don't know half the time.
Anything else? What would you like to add? Where is the Alexander technique heading? What would maybe something about the future?
I would love to think that it could be revitalized with all the research that's happening now about consciousness, and the importance of psychophysical awareness
and neuroscience
So all this it's exciting, the research. And one of the students on our training course here in Totnes is studying neuroscience as well. He's at university and he's doing all the I'm not quite sure what he's studying, but it's in that area. So coming into the Alexander technique with that knowledge as well is very exciting. I hope. I'm not sure it can, because of the cost of private lessons in a world where people don't have enough money anymore. And I do think that one way in which we have missed the boat is not running enough groups. I think it would be good that if Alexander teachers were trained to run groups with the understanding as these people come to the groups that if they want some really in-depth work, there are private, because that's how Feldenkrais worked.
Yeah.
And Feldenkrais actually trained with Alexander before he set off on his own. So, yes, and I think it's been much more successful because you don't have to fork out quite so much to get some help. Yeah.
With groups that would then be work without hands-on or with very little hands-on, or how do you run groups?
Well, if I'm running an Alexander, this is one of the things in my what am I going to do next questioning, is I might offer a group here in Totnes how to look after yourself, especially for people who are getting older. And if I do that, I'll be inviting the third-year trainees and possibly late second-year trainees to come and help me on doing that workshop, so they will get a little bit of hands-on work, and that will be good experience for the trainees as well. So that's another of the possibles in my mind.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Glen.
You're very welcome.